Good afternoon. I'm Earl Butch Graves Jr., CEO of Black Enterprise, the #1 Black digital media brand, reaching more than 9 million unique visitors every month. It's my great privilege to welcome all of you to BE's 2021 Women of Power Tech, hosted by our friends at Ally. And let me emphasize right out of the gate, this is a women's event for women, about women, conceived of and produced by women, dedicated to women's professional advancement. My job, therefore, is to get out of the way as quickly as possible. With your kind indulgence, I do want to affirm BE's fierce commitment to gender equity and empowerment. This is BE's second annual virtual event, crafted specifically for women professionals and entrepreneurs of color. All of us at BE are dedicated to presenting a viable and unique platform for powerful women to take the lead in the tech space. To that end, we've prepared a comprehensive agenda focused squarely on innovation and inspiration, and we plan to deliver on all fronts. My confidence is based on facts, not hype. For starters, we've invited an extraordinary lineup of women executives, business leaders, and tech geniuses, each one representing the apex of their respective field. Over the next 2 days, you will have a unique opportunity to network and learn from the very women shaping the future of tech. Just as important as the participants is the timing of this event. We stand at the brink of this post-pandemic era. Unexpected changes in tech that will impact the economy, the workplace, and professional opportunities for decades to come are happening as we speak, and we're going to address them in depth. For example, Black women founders receive less than 1% of venture capital investment. We're going to crack that code and start opening doors to the financial backing you deserve. From there, we'll explore the latest in financial technology and the potential of fintech to expand financial inclusion and usher in a new era of equity. We will engage in real deal conversations about emerging technologies and the growing power of diversity in the tech realm. There's lots more on the agenda, including a discussion of the widespread transition to tech brought on by the pandemic, emerging careers in cybersecurity, and the dramatic rise of social media influencers. And of course, throughout the conference, you will have the opportunity to gain resources and connect with our partners in the sponsor showcase. Before we get started, I want to thank our host sponsor, Ally, for their partnership, our presenting sponsor, Cadillac, and our platinum sponsors, BlackRock, Capital One, Merck, United Health Group, featuring Optum, and Walmart. Finally, thank you to our corporate sponsors, our friends at Fidelity Investments, AT&T, PayPal, and Salesforce. Most importantly, I want to thank you, our attendees, for your engagement and continued confidence in Black Enterprise. Welcome to the Women of Power Tech Summit 2021. And now I'm happy to introduce our host. Here representing Ally is its Director of Multicultural Marketing, Ms. Erica Hughes. Erica?
Thank you, Butch, and welcome. I'm Erica Hughes, and I'm the Director of Multicultural Marketing at Ally. On behalf of my colleagues at Ally, let me say how excited we are to support this year's Black Enterprise Women of Power Tech Summit. Wherever smart, dynamic, and beautiful women are convening, talking about creating opportunities for women in our community, that's the place we want to be. And on a personal level, I have turned to Black Enterprise for years as a source of knowledge and information around business, which makes today extra special for me. For those who aren't familiar, Ally is a leading digital financial services company and the largest digital-only bank in the US. We offer a full range of products that help customers borrow, save, and invest so they can spend on the things that really matter. Ally isn't just our name, it's our mission. Our purpose is to be a true ally, grounded in the promise of doing it right for our customers, communities, and employees. We work every day to live up to that promise. At Ally, we're deeply committed to diversity and inclusion and fostering the next generation of leaders. Whether it be our relationship with Thurgood Marshall College Fund and the Sean Anderson Foundation for our annual Moguls in the Making competition that exclusively supports the students at historically Black colleges and universities, or our investment in Black and Brown venture funds so that the people who are writing the checks look directly like the communities that they're investing in. Representation matters, and we must consciously work hard to grow it. And that brings us to the conference today, which will serve to bring more Black women to our team at Ally and shed light on the barriers that women of color face gaining access to the industry. Thank you so much for being here. We can't wait to have these important conversations to create broader access of careers in tech for women of color and strengthening our industry and create a more inclusive landscape for us all. Thank you and enjoy.
Hello, and welcome to the Fundamentals of Funding. I'm Elisa Gums, the Executive Managing Editor of Black Enterprise. As the host of our Sisters Inc. podcast for and about women entrepreneurs, I say these words almost every week. Black women are the fastest growing group of entrepreneurs in America. And that's amazing. But unfortunately, what's also true is that our businesses are woefully underfunded. When it comes to tech businesses, that translates to the reality that Black women founders receive less than 1% of all venture capital funding. Today, we're speaking with someone who is working every single day to change that and to bring equity to the startup space. She's a serial entrepreneur, the author of a best-selling business memoir, an investor and advisor, and the CEO of an organization that advocates for Black and Latinx women entrepreneurs. Please welcome Lauren Milan.
Thank you so much for having me, Elisa. That was a beautiful welcome. It's always so great to be here with my BE family and such a full circle moment, because I think I was first introduced to Black Enterprises entrepreneurship. I don't know if it was entrepreneurship conference first or Women of Power first, but it was the informal creation of so much that we now formally do at Digital Undivided, which was informally meeting in those hotel lobbies at conferences and workshopping and brainstorming and problem solving, with fellow folk of color across all industries of business. So it feels really good to be back. And unfortunately, we're not together in person, but hopefully next year. So thank you so much for having me.
Well, we're so glad that you could join us, and you are the perfect person for us to have this conversation with, because you've been on all sides of it as an entrepreneur, as an investor, and as an advocate. And I'm not going to take it all the way back to your lemonade stand, but you have been running your own businesses since you were 19. And I would love to hear what your experience as an entrepreneur has been like.
I think that's a wonderful question. And I think that this may sound funny, but in as much as I have become known to be a businesswoman and a creator of businesses and companies and an investor, it took me a really long time to accept the label of entrepreneur, because for me, it was just work. And I think that if we go back to the lemonade stand, I was 11, almost 12. And this idea of making my own money, carving my own path forward, making my own way, making my own rules, because I had the economic independence to determine and decide how I wanted to live my life or run my business, was always deeply ingrained in me. I always saw, financial wherewithal or the lack thereof to be the key to your freedom, the freedom of how you live your life every day, freedom of the decisions that we decide to make, the freedom of anything that we choose to do in life, right? And so for me, I think it's been a lot of working backwards in many ways. And I think I'm an accidental entrepreneur. I think I've always created what I thought needed to exist, or I've always created a solution to a problem that maybe others didn't see, the financial viability in, or they didn't think would be a winning way. But I think the through and through line of my life and my career has always been A, taking a risk on myself, B, deeply believing in myself, and C, being confident in every decision I make and knowing that I cannot backtrack that decision. And I think when you live your life in that way, and certainly when you establish business or become an entrepreneur with that mindset, that makes you become so self-reliant. Like everything that I just mentioned came back to me personally, me individually. And so to know and understand the power that we each have as individuals to create a different path forward in our lives is a very powerful realization, but it's one that we have to have that realization along with the resources. And so I think that's the beautiful part of me being, CEO of Digital Undivided right now, is that so much of what I have done informally, out of the goodness of my heart, in my kitchen, in my living room, all over these years is a company. And it's a company that I've been connected to for a long time as a board member, as an advisor, as a mentor, as someone who deeply believed in our overall mission. But now I have this incredible team behind me that can help rally for greater outcomes in shorter periods of time.
I'm so glad you spoke about that importance of entrepreneurship to you, because I think that really cuts straight to the bottom line for all Black women, is that really entrepreneurship is about our independence, and specifically our financial independence. But I'm not finished with memory lane yet. You are a pioneer in the tech space as the first Black woman to start an early stage venture capital fund called Gen Y Capital Partners back in 2011. And the first thing I would like you to do, Lauren, is to demystify venture capital for our audience, to tell them exactly what it is and explain how it fits in to the overall funding equation for small businesses.
Yeah, I think I'm going to start with the latter part of your question first. And this is something that I used to often speak to Alfred Edmond about and to Butch, which was, hey, I used to sit on all of these funding panels in 2012 for Black Enterprise, 2013. And I was up there with an SBA person, and I was up there with, someone who gives small loans. And then I was up there with someone who was going to talk credit card strategy. And then there was me talking about venture. And so it's important that we kind of demark that time, because 10 years ago, when I was starting Gen Y Capital, the conversation of venture, specifically for people of color, let alone the double minority being women of color, was a conversation that was one of many alongside all of these other traditional funding models that our community knew best, but for which we qualified the least. Like, you'll have to hear me say that. For which we knew most and were least qualified. But it's what we knew the most, it's what we heard the most. Go to your local bank and get a small business loan. And I had to say to Alfred, love him dearly, please do not put me on stage with SBA folks. They're great, love them, they're fantastic, but it is a completely different strategy, and it needs its own airtime, and SBA needs their own airtime, and the small business loans and the credit card strategies and the venture debt needs their airtime, and potential private equity funding solutions need their airtime. But where private equity could sit is with venture capital, right? But you can't really get to the private equity dollars for any kind of business unless you have early stage VC capital first, or you just have a crazy, wild hockey stick moment. But another thing that I've been saying a lot, Alyssa, a lot recently, and I wish we were in person, because this is like, I want to see virtual hands. So maybe somebody will like DM me or something, like how many folks, raise their hand virtually or don't raise their hand virtually. But show me one founder of color, man or woman, who has raised tens or hundreds or of millions or billions of dollars on a non-revenue generating company. We don't get to do it. We don't get to do it. And so when we go back to talking about me and VC, it was an important time, because people of color, what we could do was sell ideas. That's what our non-minority counterparts do. They sell ideas in decks. They sell ideas made in Canva. They sell ideas and strategies that are hypothetical. They are projections. They are hopes and dreams for the future. They are big vision for the future. And we buy into big vision all the time as VCs and as investors. And so where were people of color best qualified? In the early stage VC world. But nobody was teaching us or telling us, except for me at that time, and I'm only one person, how to write a deck, how to get the dollars, how to get the introduction. So all that we knew was this traditional road of go to the bank, get a banker. Oh, but you haven't been in business. Oh, but you don't have a business. Oh, but you're not incorporated. All of these things. And so the importance of venture capital for our community is a big deal, because otherwise we're going to be stuck. We're going to be cogs in a wheel with small businesses that do not receive the funding, not because we're not positioned or deserving, but because no one has taught us how to get the funding that is right for our business. Because the other thing is, at the flip side, that your local bank or something else is not going to invest in a big dream, vision, future forward projection, but a VC will, right? Your bank is also not going to say, here, you should have these advisors and these mentors, and you should have these folks on your board. They'll say, here's your capital, good luck. But if you don't know where to put that capital to work, if you don't know who to hire, if you don't know the lawyer to hire, if you don't know the first hire to hire, the second hire to hire, then your money gets wasted. And then you come back without returns. So I'll pause on that. And then the beginning part of your question, again, to Gen Y Capital, and I will just say that, you know, I started that 10 years ago in 2011. We were in 2021. We were early. We were very early. And so, you know, it's heartwarming to hear in some respects, hey, Lauren, you were the first woman to do this. Great. I also pioneered a new model of venture financing altogether. You didn't see venture partner committees. You didn't see warrants being taken from venture firms because they were giving advisory services to companies. You didn't see VC firms doubling down on the amount of entrepreneurs who were also investors in their fund to say, not only can you give us greater deal flow, but you can help us navigate the solutions to these problems. We did more than just write checks, because I've never believed that just writing the check is enough. Whether you get the check from the bank, the credit card, the SBA, your grandma, your grandpa, somebody left it to you, it doesn't matter if you don't know how to operate business and if you don't know how to navigate the financial systems that exist for you to be able to raise money. And so, you know, it's a little bittersweet, because there's so much that I did so early, but oftentimes when we're early, sometimes we win big, and I have won very big in many ways. But then there are other times when you're very early and it's just full of frustration. And so I am also a little frustrated, because there are some things that I've been saying we needed to do for a long time. And now that, and when I was saying that we needed to do them, some people listened, not all. And now what's the norm? Now the model that I created as a Black woman 10 years ago, when I was 26 years old, I actually created the model when I was 25 for a fund that opened up when I was 26, that now has become the new model that Silicon Valley is calling the, you know, entrepreneur-friendly capital. I just didn't call it entrepreneur-friendly capital. I called it Gen Y Capital.
Wow. Well, you are clearly so passionate about this, and I have to ask, why did you choose to become an investor, and why did you choose specifically to invest in tech businesses?
They threw me in the fire. That's first. So I will say that when I was starting Gen Y Capital, 2010, we were thinking about doing this. This was the same time when Jared Kushner was starting Thrive Capital. And everyone was saying, you know, that he and his brother were, you know, just well connected, but they were hanging out with Jack Dorsey and the whole Twitter crew, and they were getting in on all these deals, and they were hanging with Evan Spiegel, and then they got into Snap, and they got into everything that was hot and cool before anyone even knew they were raising around. But that was network. That was network. And I thought that I wanted to go to business school. And in fact, I was going to go to HBS or to Stanford, and one of our largest LPs in the fund, one of our largest investors, limited partners, said, I'll invest in the fund if you run it, Lauren. I was like, me run it? We had a plan. The plan was I was well connected. I had access to great deal flow. I had some capital. I had been co-investing with guys that had the same, you know, similar access to different industries, different parts of the ecosystem. We all had great deal flow. We came together as a little syndicate of our own to make early stage investments in companies, and to also roll up our sleeves and mentor them and to help accelerate their chances of success. Cool. They said, this all sounds great, but your idea that you're going to set it up and go back to doing your own entrepreneurial thing, you're going to hire somebody to do the things day to day that we have seen you do, Lauren, we will give you this check if you run the fund. And then we heard that from 3 other investors. And I kept saying, but y'all, I want to be clear. I've never run other people's money before. I don't know if I want to run other people's money before. And they said, you're not going to run our money. You're going to invest it. And you're going to invest it alongside your own money, which is what you're already doing. And they pointed to Thrive Capital at that time. And they said, same thing. What do they have? Network. What do they have? Access. What do they know? How to make that access and that network mobilize for opportunity. Lauren, what do you know? What do you have? Network. Access. You have access and network on both sides of the coin, Lauren. You know the non-minority folks. You know, I've been called all kinds of names over the years, you know, for assimilating or whatever. I don't even subscribe to code switching, but whatever it is that you want to call that, but that I could sit in those rooms and I could sit in our rooms and that I could bridge the two. And they said, you can do this, and anything you don't know, you're going to hire for, just like any other CEO or leader who doesn't know something, they hire for it. So make a list of your top hires where you think your top, you know, first 2-3 hires where you need support. And that's what I did. And ultimately, if I wanted checks from those last 3 investors, I had to run the fund as managing director. And all of my other partners had left me to run the fund anyway, to set up all of the fund's formation, to set up what you call our drawdown notices, our subscription agreements, our deck, doing all of our investor conversations, doing all of our due diligence on potential deals, doing all of our waterfall calculations, doing all of our notices, everything, whatever it was that we needed, I did. That was my job. And that was also on the heels of me, you know, selling my first company, which was the Vineyard and Winery. So when we talk about another highly regulated industry, I was already that type A, you know, chief operating officer type that was really good at infrastructure, really good at operations. And that's everything that I brought to the fund as well. And then to go to the other part of your question, which I believe was why VC?
Why invest in technology businesses? I think, you know,
why in
because
technology?
we're at the Women of Power Tech conferences, we have a lot of entrepreneurs or would-be entrepreneurs who are thinking about being in the tech space. And there's a very specific reason that you chose to invest in tech businesses.
Maybe not as specific as someone would think, to be honest. So my reality, and I think our reality shapes all of the decisions that we make in life. My reality is that I had enormous success with business number 1, but I had enormous success with something that I built in 7.5, almost 8 years to become an enormous success. And by the time I was exiting that business, the world had their eyes on a completely different sector of the way in which the world could move. So imagine, I went from a vineyard and winery. I went from something so so laborious, so hands-on, so the antithesis of technology. Like there's nothing, like you are praying sometimes during harvest season that you don't have a rain, that you don't, you know, like these are not elements that you can control. There's no AI, there's no VR, there's no, like, we didn't have an indoor greenhouse with like ergonomic solutions. I couldn't set my perfect temperature and perfect humidity and all this. Maybe now if I have another vineyard, that's what it would be. Maybe it would be an indoor vineyard and it would all be, you know, perfectly temperature controlled. And one year you could have wine that tasted like the Loire Valley of France. And then the next year you could change the inside environment. You could have wines that taste like they came from South Africa. Who knows? But that's not the business that I was running or the business that I was in. So the reality was that I had built something as an outlier and had become very successful at it, but very successful by who and what standards? By the multiples of money that I had started in this business? Absolutely. But not by the tech multiples that by the time I sold that business, I saw people saying, oh, I'm leaving for X. I mean, for those of you that are listening in the audience, I came up in business, and I'm only but 36 years old today, but I came up in business when, if you were an entrepreneur, you sold your company for 30, 40, $50 million, you were doing well, but you also weren't taking a lot of outside capital. So of that 30, 40, 50 million, you got to go home with probably 80% of it, or 75% of it, even after you take care of your team, right? Because you probably weren't building your business, going out, raising a lot of money on a cap table, saying, I've got to pay back all my investors, which is the VC model way, or a lot of other funding methods. You obviously have to pay back the capital that you take. I come from the school of thought in business where you make money, you have revenues, proof is in the pudding, proof is in the pudding. And so when I came off of, the sale of the vineyard, I had all of this capital, and I had, I think, the reaction that I've been told from a lot of wealth managers is the normal reaction, which is like, you actually don't do anything with your money. You actually sit on it for a while because you're like, but I just got it. Where do I put it? And then somebody calls you up and goes, but you don't just keep it in your local bank getting, negligible interest, right? So it's like, oh, okay, well, wait, but everything else comes with risk. I don't know if I want that risk. Maybe I'll just let it sit there. So I was intrigued, Elisa. I was intrigued because I'd watched grapes grow for 8 years. Literally, I watched grapes grow. I sold grapes. I saw a difference in harvest. Some years I had 2 tons to the acre. Sometimes I had 1 ton to the acre. That affects your yield. Your crop affects your yield affects your product affects your inventory affects your sales, affects your bottom line, affects your revenue year to year. So then when I saw that there were companies that people were starting before co-working, well before, like, look, we've seen the rise and fall of WeWork already, and then it went public, okay? I didn't grow up in business in a WeWork time. People were working in their kitchens, their living rooms, and Starbuckses. That was co-working. So to see people co-working in that way and raising $500,000, $1 million, $1.5 million, again, nobody was also doing Series seed rounds from Starbucks raising $5 million. Now you see Series seed rounds at almost $10 million, A's at 10, 12, 15 million. You didn't see that then. You were starting with a much smaller seed and you were expected to have a proof point, and then you grow a little more and you grow a little more. So I was mesmerized. That's why I jumped into technology investing. I was like, wait, I can give you a smaller amount of capital now, and then I can see if it's like a good idea or like not a good idea within 6 to 12 months. And then I can decide if I want to give you more money or not, or if I want to cut my losses. That was like music to my ears on the heels of pouring significant amounts of capital into a very capital intensive, very much the long game kind of business, being a vineyard and winery. And then year to year, realizing that I had built an incredible business, but also a business to which I had no control over certain aspects of its growth. That began to become an antithesis to like Lauren Mylan as the CEO and Lauren Mylan as the business person, which is I'm supposed to create something really great, really meaningful, and then I'm supposed to learn how to scale it, scale customers, scale average order amounts, whatever it is, but scale. And I found that it was difficult to scale in something where I didn't control my inventory. So then to see, or I didn't control the outcomes of my revenue. There's only so many factors that I could control, because really, truly, it's up to God. It really is. Like every single contract I signed for the Vineyard and Winery had a force majeure clause. Every single one. Because what's an act of God? A hurricane? It's all going to happen out in the elements that we just don't control.
Lauren, you have advised and invested in more than 40 startups, which have generated over $1 billion in revenue. And I'm sure this is an impossible question to answer in just a few minutes, but what have you learned sitting on the other side, on the investor side, or heard from your fellow investors over the years that you can share with our audience of entrepreneurs to help them on their funding journey?
Ooh, that's a tough one. I think it's hard to pick the right company. I always say that you bet the jockey, not the horse, which in investing terminology means you bet on the entrepreneur, not just the company itself. And so I think I'm a really great picker of people and talent. And I always pick the entrepreneur first. I have to love the business. I have to like the business. I have to see the opportunity. But I think, a wonderful investor also, doesn't expect every investment to be a home run. You certainly understand that there is risk associated with deploying capital and investing capital. And I think every entrepreneur and every investor, and especially the entrepreneurs turned investors, they're all looking for what the VC world calls this barbell effect, right? You have some that do really well, you do some that don't do so well, but that the net should mean that you're up. Fine if you have some companies that you make investments into, it could be $25,000, $50,000, $75,000, $100,000, it could be $250,000. But if you've made $10,000, $250,000 investments and 2 or 3 don't do well, and 7 or 8 do incredibly well, then your net should still be positive and should still be seen as a good investor. And so I think it's a matter of finding the mix of risk. And I think that there has been some new elements that have come into investing, i.e., what makes a non-revenue generating company valuable. I remember I had the opportunity, and I kicked myself, not often, but sometimes, that I had the opportunity to invest in Oculus. I didn't understand Oculus then. Oculus came to me 9 years ago, through Joe Lonsdale, who's a big investor in Oculus. And I said, I sounds interesting, kind of, but I don't get it. And I was like, are we all gonna walk around with these headsets? But look where we are, right? So, but still, that is an opportunity where you have to consider how the investor looks at, and even the entrepreneur has to always consider, who is the investor that you're talking to? Are you looking at the investor who just wants to be in the hot company? Are you looking at the investor who's playing it for the long game and expecting, a 10x return on their investment over a period of time, but it's going to be with you for a long time? Are you looking for the investor that just wants you to get acquired so that they can get out in 3 to 5 years? Like, what kind of investor are you working with? Who are you catering to? That matters as well. Not every investor, just because they have capital, is right for every company. That's why investors have a focus. And that's why certain entrepreneurs want money from certain investors who they think are going to be aligned with their vision, their thought process, and able to support them in where they need help along the way.
You are also an advisor to Pipeline Angels, which trains women executives to become angel investors. And I really love that, because so often when you look at the funding gap, it's been Black women recently who are stepping in and filling that gap, investing in women-owned businesses. So how do we recruit more Black women to become investors?
I stopped because I don't know that I can answer that question without first touching on the fact that we need to see greater valuations for our businesses. Because I think we're putting too much emphasis on who's investing and have they invested enough. And it's great that women of color are investing. It's wonderful, but they're investing small dollars, small amounts into companies, generally speaking. And we have some outliers, I'll even include myself there. But in the scheme of things, even money that I give to companies personally, it pales in comparison to what they're going to get from a large VC firm that's writing huge checks. It just is what it is. It's the nature of the beast. That's why you have celebrities that are still going out asking for other people's capital for their business, even though they have money themselves. Like, let that sink in. Okay. So everybody, and you have people that are like, well, why don't you just do it all with your own money? You show me one good entrepreneur who's always done it all with their own money. It's just, at some point, it's not good business. You say, okay, I have to separate. There's a silo. This business did well. I'm going to end that business. I'm going to start this business. This business has financing needs. Maybe I will self-fund some of it. Normally you self-fund some when you get to a certain level, and then you go ahead and go out for additional capital. But I think the importance is not just on, do we have more women of color writing checks? Because women of color need to write checks that are going to be as profitable for them, even as angel investors, as the checks that our non-minority counterparts write into comparable businesses in their own communities. And my fear, and why I'm so passionate about the work we're doing at Digital Undivided right now, is that we need to see companies created and built by women of color and people of color. We need to see these companies sustain. We need to see them win. We need to see them get greater funding. We need to see them garner greater revenue. We need to see them going towards unicorn status. Those are 5 things. I see none of them happening right now. So I don't want to celebrate the fact that we see checks being written by women of color. That's great. That to me indicates that we have a certain amount of personal discretionary wealth, some, not tons, but some, that women of color can finally say, I'm going to write a check into somebody else's business. But what I'm hearing most of are $1,000, $2,500, $5,000 checks. And those checks are meaningful in aggregate, but do we have enough women, even if they're getting $10,000 checks, even if they're getting $25,000 checks from a woman of color, do we have enough women of color in aggregate who could come together and fill an entire $1 million, $2, $3, $4 million funding round for a business? Now we might, but are they all coming together to say, I'm also interested in this business and I have the cash, I got the capital, I got the interest, I'm going to send it to you. Like, those stars have to align too. It has to be something that an investor is interested in investing in. But I need to see us It's a great indicator. It's an incredible indicator. Don't get me wrong. But we're not yet at the point where we have thousands of those archetypes of women of color with the ability to write meaningful checks, and also who come together in a collaborative manner to say, hey, we can shake this up. You actually don't need capital from these other places, because they still need capital from these other places. Right? And I also don't want to see us see the women of color who have accumulated enough wealth to say that with my discretionary wealth or income, I want to invest in tech companies. But then all of a sudden, how long is that trend going to last? If they don't see great ROI on their investment, they're going to stop investing at some point, because that well is going to run dry. That is the cycle of life, right? Like that's just the cycle of life. So we need to see the businesses founded by women and people of color have higher valuations, so that we see this investment increasing, even if it's just on paper. There's so many women I see that write checks, but they're like, oh, I invested 3 years ago, and the cap table looks the same.
Digital Undivided is probably best known for Project Diane. No, I want to get into, because you make a great point about what we have to do to move the needle on women's businesses. And it's a big part of what you're doing at Digital Undivided. So you're probably best known for Project Diane, which is your proprietary research report on the state of Black and Latinx women founders. When the first report came out in 2016, it was groundbreaking, and it quickly became the Bible when it comes to women of color and funding. So tell us about the realities for women of color entrepreneurs that Project Diane lays out, and about the progress we've made over the past 5 years.
Well, I think Project Diane has been groundbreaking because it was saying and sharing everything that we were discovering in the ecosystem. At that time, I was not CEO, I was chair of our board of directors. And it shared everything that we knew and everything that we were also afraid to say. And I think that is still where we are today. I continue as CEO to share the information that many see and observe and are afraid or in denial about acknowledging. And that gets to be the load that I carry every day for us as women of color, that I can say, you know, don't you dare fix your mouth and talk to another woman of color like that, because you've got to look at our data. And numbers don't lie. And that's why we started this report, is because numbers don't lie. And unfortunately, you have to put numbers behind problems. You unfortunately have to dig deeper into the wounds and the injustices that exist and the barriers that are in our way to say, hey, look, this is quantifiable. And it's unfortunate that we have to quantify it in that way, but we continue to. And I think that the evolution that we've seen with our research is interesting in a lot of respects. We've seen more women gaining funding for their businesses, but we've also, as I've kind of touched on a little bit, funding amounts are decreasing. So are we celebrating that? Am I celebrating that I see more companies receiving funding, but that on average, every company is now receiving less funding, while the ecosystem continues to raise the bar on what an average funding round is, and that the ecosystem continues to outpace us? No, but what I can do is draw the comparisons to how far along we would be as women of color if opportunities were more equal, if access was democratized, if access to certain services or certain platforms. There is so much that I've done under my leadership there, not just with Project Diane and our research report, but really to bring the research to life. Because what I've noticed is that it was important for people to read the research report. And it was groundbreaking on paper. I don't know that we broke ground in reality. So I'm here to make sure that we are really breaking ground in reality. And so we've done a lot, and we made a lot of noise in the last year and a half under my leadership to say, this is a conversation we fit to have today. And we're going to find a solution, because I'm tired. Like I can't. And I look at my father, who was a trailblazer in investment banking. You know, my dad was the first Black managing director on Wall Street in his day in the 80s. And my dad couldn't even start on the real Wall Street in New York. He had to start out of the office of First Boston in San Francisco, and then make his way to New York and trade in San Francisco before coming to the real Wall Street, and then working his way up to be, again, first managing director at the companies that he ended up at, every single one, at every single company. from the time I was a little girl, and we're still in the same place. We are not that far off. I grew up as a young girl in the 80s and the 90s with a dad who would tell me his stories of riding the back of the bus and growing up in Louisiana, and segregated Louisiana, drinking out of the colored Negro water fountain. Now, granted, we're not drinking out of different water fountains today, but there's so much about even proverbially riding the back of the bus that we are still dealing with in this moment. So when are we going to actually break ground in reality? And I think our research does that, but it is now our job, and thank you, Elisa, as well, for joining in this amplification of our research and our work, but to not just let the research report sit in paper anymore. We have to really socialize the impacts of our research. We have to also highlight the importance of our research in reality, which is that you are seeing women, pivot their businesses, you are seeing them persevere in their pivots, you are seeing them fail at a far less rate, at a 27% fail rate. Do Black and Latinx women fail in comparison to the 42% national average fail rate of all businesses, including those founded and created by men? And we do it with less capital, significantly less capital. We do it with no board of directors. We do it without, guardian angels on our shoulder whispering in our ear, telling us who to talk to and getting a meeting for us. We do it without being ushered onto, the big top list, the 20 under 20, 30 under 30, 40. We do it without all of these things. So imagine if women of color could get on the XYZ lists, there's many of them, right? And the mainstream list. I love Black enterprise dearly, but we need to see our people on the mainstream list, and not because the Black enterprise list don't matter, not because the lists specifically for our community don't matter. They do to us, but what does it matter to them, right? So we need our work and our research to be taken mainstream. I think that is the biggest thing I can say, is like, yes, our work is groundbreaking. Our work is incredible, but our work has to become more mainstream, which is what I've been doing every day since I got here, because we keep having these conversations with ourselves about ourselves. I don't need to tell you, Alyssa, that you girl, you're beautiful, you're amazing. You know that, you're a bomb, like your boss, like you're the bomb. You don't need to hear that from me. You need that from the outside world. We need the outside world to be reading your articles. We need the outside world, outside of our microcosm of our people.
And
I'll leave that
checks. Yes, and we need the checks to come with the praise. Lauren, thank you so much for sharing your work and your wisdom with us today, and for all that you and Digital Undivided are doing to advance Black women entrepreneurs. You are an invaluable resource to our community, and I hope everyone out there goes to their website to check out all of their programs. As Lauren said, she wants to put the research into solutions, and they have real programs for entrepreneurs that meet you where you are in whatever stage of the funding journey you're in. Thank you again, Lauren, and thanks everyone for joining us.